All right, guys, what is up? Welcome to the top DPS of week 1 Cataclysm. We're going to take a look at the logs today and see what DPS are standing out in the raids on single target fights, what DPS is doing good on multi-target, and even some two-target situations. There's a lot of raids in Cataclysm, so I want to see who the standout players are overall, and if the chart of the tier list that came out before Cataclysm is actually accurate for today, because as you know, Cataclysm came out like 15 years ago. So people have gotten a lot better since then, and I'm kind of trying to see if the tier list from back then compares with the tier list of today. So let's get into it. We're going to pull up the stats for all of the raids and then filter by 1 day, and then we'll go and drop this down to the 95th percentile. Okay, so as I thought, the Unholy DKs were going to rise to the top. They tend to not be as gear dependent as some of the other classes, and in my raids, our Unholy DKs are just absolutely cranking, and they do good on single target, and they do really good on AoE, two target. I mean, everything. They're just insane, and no one can really compete with them in some of our raids. So let's take a look at a few different fights to see if this breakdown changes on a multi-target fight versus a single target fight. So let's first choose a single target fight. Of course, we're doing heroic 25-man 95th percentile. We won't really get into the 100 at the top, like at that 100 percentile. You'll probably see the fire mages start to rise a bit, because they'll be the guys with the best gear in the world, and they're getting PIs and probably getting the infusion from the warlocks that gives them haste as well. So the survival hunters are actually rising up above the mages. I do predict that the mages will be top at the end of the tier, just because of how well they scale with gear and with haste and stuff. But that's interesting. Right now, even the max percentiles, the survival hunters are leaping the Elishams and the fire mages. And that's it for the overall raid. I just think that survival hunter is really good single target and multi-target, whereas mages are struggling right now single target. They're incredible on a fight like Halus. So if we pull up a fight, actually we can pull up a fight like Halus first. Let's do that. So let's change the boss to Halus. And wow, I was not expecting this. Fire Mage, yes, I was expecting to be top, but combat rogues are leaps and bounds ahead of any other class in the game. I think initially the Fire Mages in this fight spiked to the top because of how many whelps there are, and then you're usually doing 2 to 3 dragons. But combat rogues are king of sustained damage to 2 targets, and this fight does drop down to 2 targets, to 2 to 3 targets for the majority of the fight. So maybe that's why combat rogues are just absolutely leaping above everybody else in this fight, because like I said, it's primarily a 2 or 3 target fight towards for the majority of it. Let's take a look at a full single target fight like Chimeron. And as you can see, in a pure single target battle, Unholy DKs and Elisham surprisingly holding their own, and then the assassin rogues will be above the combat rogues in the pure single target. Fire mages dropping down to around 6th right now. I do, like I said, think that fire mage scales probably the best with gear, so they'll be rising up to the top once they get gear. I play fire mage, so I'm a bit biased, so I think I'm hoping and crossing my fingers that I'll be towards the top DPS of the tier when I get all the gear to get my haste points around 25%. Yeah. But yeah, for right now, Unholy DK is just the king of single target. They do fantastic AoE and 2 target as well. And they're just hard to beat. They're definitely hard to beat. So right now, people are certainly stacking Unholy DKs. And a lot of the Race to World First stuff, I saw like 4 Warlocks, 4 DKs, a couple of Elishams, you know what I mean? And sometimes even 4 Hunters in some of the Race to World First stuff. So that makes sense. And then one more fight like an Omnitron defense system, which is a lot of times 2 target. Okay, Fire Mage is doing well here in the Omnitron fight. That's a surprise. I didn't expect Fire Mages to be the top there. Maybe that's because their dots spread, and then you spread the dots, and then the tanks pull them apart. So a good Fire Mage can maybe spread the dots, and then they can move them apart. Other than that, I still think that fire mages will be rising, and warlocks are actually performing well, even though there's not very many warlocks in the game. It's kind of sad to see. It's kind of sad to see that people aren't playing Warlock. I mean, if you're looking at basically every fight besides Alakir, Alakir is tough for casters. I'm going to say this. Being a caster on Alakir is very tough, unless you're an Affliction Warlock and you can cast on the move, because there's a lot of movement. And I'm surprisingly, the Arms Warriors are topping in this fight, but I guess it makes sense because they can keep up their damage while they're moving, and their bleeds are always on the target. Unholies and Rets doing really well on Alakir as well. And let's take a look at maybe a fight like Cho'Gall is all Fire Mage. Wow, because there's a lot of those what are they, the oozes that spawn? Holy crap, Fire Mage is just cranking on this fight. It's not even close. That is unreal how much damage that Fire Mage is doing on the Cho'Gall fight. Sinestra, the last prog and BFD. Shadow Priest, surprisingly, the top DPS here. I wonder why that is. Maybe we could take a look and see why Shadow Priest is performing so well on these fights. I love that there's a spread of damage on these fights, and it's not just all one or the other. It looks like Affliction Warlock on a fight like Thoralion and Valiona. So this is kind of a two-target fight, but not everyone can spread their dots to the dragon that's flying in the air. Like Fire Mage has a tough time spreading their dots. But I imagine like Balance and Affliction Warlock and maybe Shadow Priest that has longer dots that can put on both targets, and Unholy DKs, if they can spread their dots to the dragon that's flying in the air, then these classes are going to be king for a fight like Thoralion and Valiona. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the DPS on each fight that's in the top 10. And this is a much easier way of kind of looking at it. So Conclave of the Wind, we have a lot of Survival Hunters that are doing really well on this fight, and Demonology Warlocks. Alakir is probably going to be mostly melee DPS with some LE Shamans being able to compete there as well. Omnichom Defense System is Fire Mage. Magma is all rogues, and it looks like combat rogues. This is interesting. So let's click on Magma, and wow, the top 100 is almost all combat rogues, and this must be because it's a two-target fight. So let's see what Rick Slick is doing. So he has Blade Flurry up the whole time, and he is cleaving off of two targets, Blade Flurry being his most damage. So rogues are really good at doing the same amount of damage to one target as they do to two. So any two-target fight, combat rogue should be number one by a mile. And there you have it. Magma, I guess, is a two-target fight primarily. So they're able to just keep up their damage on the two targets and just kind of pop off there. Survival Hunters performing really well. Chimeron, single-target fight. It looks like, actually, Warlock Demonology is the king of single-target damage here. And then Unholy DK and Survival right there in the top 10. Looking really good on the pure single target fights. And then Warriors and Fire Mages showing out on these fights where it's single target a little bit, and then there's some ads that pop off, so you have big chances to do burst damage to the ads, which is where Recklessness and Combustion, you'll see them start to shine here. And then surprisingly, Demonology Warlocks still holding their own in these raids, which is just incredible. Nefarian's End, surprisingly, we have some Shadow Priests and some Retribution Paladins starting to pop off here on the Nefarian fight. This one I feel like can go either way, because Nefarian, it has a single ad phase, and then it has a phase where you're just doing damage to the dragons, but they're separate. So I'm not really sure. Maybe Ret is just able to keep its sustained damage up really high. I wonder what makes Ret Paladin so good on the Nefarian fight. Take a look here. Maybe because they're able to, they have more ranged attacks than the other melees, so they're able to do damage to the target that they're hitting in phase 2, as well as the dragon that's flying in the air. They're able to put some damage onto Nefarian. That could be it. I could see that working. Hunters probably be able to do sustained damage because they're able to do damage to Nefarian while he's in the air in phase 2. That makes sense. But these other classes also able to kind of hold their own on Nefarian's Inn, which is primarily a single target fight. Halfus Wormbreaker is certainly interesting because this fight starts off as like a 10 to 15 target fight, and then it ends up boiling down to a 3 to 2 and then a single target fight in the end. So mages, if you're able to do a massive amount of damage off the start, and then you're able to kill all the rest of the bosses pretty quickly, I think mage has a good chance of being top damage. Whereas if it's a longer fight sustained, you see the mage fights are a bit shorter, except for this one. This one is 253, and Peacemaker is still able to be top damage. So yeah, I imagine that if the mage fights are a bit longer, they might have a tough time keeping up with the rogues, but mages and rogues will be top damage on Halus. And then Thoralion and Valiona, a 2-target fight primarily. Look at Chanimal right here in the top 8. For Affliction Warlocks, he's able to spread his dots on both dragons. Looks like Ellie maybe is able to chain lightning both of the dragons, and then DKs may be able to spread their dots to both. And then, of course, Shadow Priest as well. The Ascendant Council, wow, all Unholy DKs. That's incredible. That's insane. That's a lot of damage on the 2 targets. And I guess the DKs are just able to sustain and just keep dealing the high DPS for a long period of time, because it's quite a longer fight, 4 to 5 minute fight there. Now, Cho'Gall is going to be Fire Mage only, looking around the 7, 8, and 9 minute mark for some of these fights, and Fire Mage is able to just do a ton of sustain damage to those oozes when they spawn. And then Sinestra being mainly single target with some AoE, and it's just a mixture of Mage, Survival Hunter, and a Shadow Priest actually in the top. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the top trinkets for each class, what people are using. Looks like for Mage, the top trinkets for Mage are going to be the Dark Moon card Volcano and the Stump of Time for most mages right now. The Essence of the Cyclone is Survivor Hunter Biss with the Unsolvable Riddle coming in second for most of them. And then the alternate would be the Key to the Endless Chamber, which is just a heroic trinket. Now, trinkets are a big part of your damage in retail, and Cataclysm is one of the first expansions where I feel like, yeah, the trinkets play a very large role in your damage, and having the meta trinkets is very important if you're going to try to compete for top damage. Looks like the Warlocks are using Soul Casket and Dark Moon card Volcano, so Volcano again showing up that for casters. Even on the Ellie Shamans, same thing, Volcano and Stump of Time being the best for them. Now, Unholy DKs, it looks like Unholy DKs are just using a plethora of trinkets here. We have the Impatience of the Youth and the License to Slay doing well there. I see another License to Slay with a Heart of Solace. I see a Heart of Rage here with a Heart of Solace. So combine those 4 different trinket options right there for the DKs. All the rogues seem to have the same thing. It's going to be Fluid Death and Left Eye of Raj. I'm not seeing too many assassination rogues in the top damage. It looks like just combat rogues rising to the top right now on the 2-target fight. So if you don't have a combat rogue as your second spec, I highly recommend picking that up if you're a combat rogue right now. Once again, the Ellies and all the casters using the Volcano card, it's pretty much across the board. So you're going to want to save up some money and buy that ASAP. Heart of Solace and License to Slay on the Chimeran fight. This is a pure single target fight, and everyone is pretty much using the same trinkets. You do see everyone using License to Slay, but the secondary trinket for DK looks it's pretty exchangeable, and you can still do a lot of damage with any secondary trinket. The License to Slay is the only one that's pretty much recommended. For the Warriors, I see a lot of the same trinkets as DK, a Heart of Rage, a Heart of Solace, Impatience of Youth, a License to Slay here on one of them. Alando definitely knows how to play Warrior. He's using Impatience of Youth and Heart of Rage. So 372 item level trinkets. Paladins, very similar. Impatience of Youth, License to Slay, and Heart of Solace if you probably don't have one of those two. The Hunters, yeah, they're definitely looking to pick up the Cyclone. And then Unsolvable Riddle seems to be really good on Nefarian's end for them. And pretty much the same thing across the board as we scroll down. And it even looks like there's a Boomkin on Thoralion and Valiona who's able to do really good 2-target damage. He's using Volcano as well as Hourglass. That's interesting to see a Boomkin in the top DPS on a 2-target fight, which is great, because I didn't think we would be seeing any of those today in the top damages across the board. But that's pretty much it for the top DPS for week 1. Let's take a look at the chart overall one more time so we can just get a look at it. And then we'll compare this chart to next week to see how people are scaling with gear. We'll take a look at the 95th percentile, and we'll compare this chart next week to the chart as it is today. and we'll see if people start rising to the top. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit subscribe. I'll be doing a breakdown every single week where we compare the top DPS, and you can check me out on twitch.tv/Shardako. I'll see you next time.